The Japanese destroyer's searchlight sliced across the water like the finger of death. It missed our bow by only a few feet. We held our breath, engines cut to idle, drifting in the darkness off Vella Lavella. 23 American sailors pressed flat against the deck of Peter 164, trying to become invisible. Behind that destroyer, in the cargo holds of 3 Japanese transports, nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers sat unaware that their journey to reinforce Kolombangara was about to end in the black waters of the Solomon Sea. The date was July 19, 1943, and in exactly 4 minutes, we were going to unleash hell from the shadows. My hands gripped the twin .50 cal mount so tightly my knuckles ached. Beside me, Ensign Robert Dutch Vanderberg whispered coordinates to our skipper, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M. McPhersonson. The faint green glow of our compass was the only light we dared show. Behind us, hidden in the moon's shadow cast by Vella Lavella's volcanic peaks, PT-168 and PT-171 waited for our signal. We were America's secret weapons, and the Japanese Navy was about to learn why darkness was no longer their ally. My name is Chief Petty Officer Thomas Tom Harrigan of the United States Navy Reserve, and I was one of the first men to prove that small wooden boats could sink steel warships. People often ask what it felt like to be part of the most closely guarded naval secret of 1943. The truth? We were too busy trying not to die to think about making history. We only knew this. If we failed tonight, those 8,000 Japanese troops would reach Kolombangara, and they would slaughter the American boys fighting to take that airfield. Every torpedo we carried might save hundreds of American lives. Every transport we sent to the bottom meant parents back home who wouldn't receive a telegram from the War Department. To understand how 3 boats smaller than most private yachts challenged the Imperial Japanese Navy at the height of its power, you need to understand what we were facing in the summer of 1943. The Japanese had turned night fighting into an art form. Since their crushing victory at Savo Island the previous August, sinking 4 Allied cruisers without losing a ship, they owned the darkness in the Solomons. Their sailors trained for years to fight without radar, relying on keen eyesight and flawless coordination. They called their nighttime supply runs the Tokyo Express. We called it the Rat Run. Either way, once the sun went down, they moved troops with near impunity. The US Navy had bigger ships, better radar, and more firepower, but we were losing the night war. Our admirals, trained in the traditional battle line tactics of Jutland and Manila Bay, couldn't adapt fast enough. Our cruisers and destroyers, built for open ocean fleet battles, were sitting ducks in the confined island channels of the Solomons. We needed something different, something the Japanese would never expect. That something was being built in secret boatyards from New Orleans to New York, and it would revolutionize naval warfare. The PT boat, Patrol Torpedo Boat, was born from desperation and American ingenuity. 80 feet long, 20 feet wide, built from laminated mahogany plywood, powered by 3 Packard 5M12 engines, modified Liberty aircraft engines, the boat could reach over 45 knots, faster than any torpedo or conventional warship afloat. We carried 4 21-inch Mark 13 torpedoes, a 20mm Oerlikon cannon, twin .50 caliber machine guns, and enough ammunition to make life very unpleasant for the enemy, for 15 minutes, anyway. After that, we'd better be heading home or heading to the bottom. I first saw a PT boat in February 1943 at the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron Training Center in Melville, Rhode Island. I was a destroyer sailor fresh from convoy duty in the North Atlantic when the Navy asked for volunteers for hazardous duty aboard experimental vessels. They wouldn't tell us what the vessels were, only that the casualty rate was expected to exceed 50%. Out of 200 volunteers, they selected 40. I made the cut because I could navigate by the stars and had small boat experience from growing up on Chesapeake Bay. The first time I stepped aboard PT-164, I thought the Navy had lost its mind. This wasn't a warship, it was a glorified speedboat with delusions of grandeur. The hull was wood. Wood, in a war of steel and armor. The quarters were so cramped that hot bunking wasn't just common, it was required. There was no armor except thin sheet metal around the bridge. One solid hit from anything larger than a rifle round and we'd be nothing but floating matchsticks. But then I met McPhersonson, and everything changed. Mac was 28, ancient by PT boat standards, with eyes that had already seen too much. He'd been at Pearl Harbor aboard the destroyer USS Shaw during the attack, fought at Midway, and volunteered for PT boats because, in his words, "I'm tired of being a target. Time to be the hunter." He understood something the rest of us needed weeks to learn. PT boats weren't meant to fight like warships. They were maritime guerrillas, seagoing assassins who struck from ambush and vanished before the enemy could react. Our crew was a collection of misfits and specialists who would never have served together on a regular Navy vessel. Dutch Vanderberg, our executive officer, had once been a Yale mathematics professor, a man who could calculate torpedo firing solutions in his head faster than most sailors could work a slide rule. Chief motor machinist's mate Carlos Charlie Mendoza had built racing engines in Los Angeles before the war. He could make our temperamental Packards purr like kittens or roar like lions depending on what we needed. Radioman Second Class William Sparks Patterson came from the submarine service, where he'd learned to operate a radio in absolute silence. Our torpedo man, gunner's mate First Class Patrick Paddy O'Brien, was an artist with those mechanical fish. Each Mark 13 torpedo weighed 2,200 pounds and cost as much as a house back home, so Paddy treated them better than most men treated their wives. He was always adjusting, cleaning, and sweet-talking them. "These beauties," he'd say while polishing the bronze propellers, "are the only reason the Japs will take us seriously. One shot, one kill, or we're just expensive target practice." The rest of our 12-man crew included 2 more gunners, an engineer, a cook who doubled as a medic, and 3 seamen who did everything else. We were black and white, city boys and farm kids, high school dropouts and college graduates, united by one simple fact. We had all volunteered knowing we probably wouldn't survive the war. Training at Melville was brutal and unforgiving. The Navy had learned from early PT boat losses that enthusiasm alone wasn't enough. We had to be faster, smarter, and more vicious than anything the Japanese could throw at us. We practiced high-speed attacks until we could launch torpedoes accurately while bouncing across waves at 40 knots. We learned to navigate by sound and instinct when tropical squalls reduced visibility to 0. But the most important lesson was this: we had to think like pirates, not sailors. Commander James Wild Jim Patterson, who ran the training program, had survived the Philippines campaign and escaped Corregidor on one of the last PT boats out. His philosophy was simple: the Japanese expect you to fight fair. Don't. They expect you to follow naval tradition. Don't. They expect you to fear the dark. Make them fear it instead. He taught us that our greatest weapons weren't our torpedoes, but surprise, speed, and sheer audacity. We arrived at our forward base at Relive on June 30, 1943, just as the invasion of New Georgia was beginning. The base was little more than a fuel dump, a few camouflaged Quonset huts, and a rough dock hidden under palm fronds. The first thing we noticed was the smell: rotting vegetation, diesel fuel, and the sweet stench of tropical decay. The second was the constant rumble of artillery from New Georgia, where Marines were dying to take them under airfield. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9, our unit, consisted of 12-points boats tasked with intercepting Japanese reinforcements in the Central Solomons. The mission sounded simple: patrol the waters between enemy bases and sink anything flying the rising sun. The reality was far more complex. These waters were a maze of coral reefs, volcanic islands, and hidden Japanese strongholds. The enemy had seaplanes for reconnaissance, coast watchers on every major island, and destroyer squadrons specifically trained to hunt PT boats. Our first patrol on July 5 was a disaster. 3 boats, including ours, attempted to intercept a Japanese convoy near Viju. We were spotted by a float plane before we could get into position. Within minutes, 4 destroyers were bearing down on us with searchlights blazing and guns firing. We scattered like rabbits, racing through a gauntlet of shell splashes. Peter 158 took a direct hit from a 5-inch shell and disintegrated. 12 men gone in an instant, blown to fragments along with their boat. We spent 4 hours dodging through reefs and narrow channels before finally escaping. No torpedoes fired. No enemy ships damaged. 1 boat destroyed, and an entire crew lost. That night, back at Relive, Mac gathered us together. "We learned something important today," he said quietly. We can't fight them like destroyers fight each other. We're not built for gun duels. We strike from ambush, or we don't strike at all. It was a hard lesson, paid for in blood, but it shaped every mission that followed. Over the next 2 weeks, we developed new tactics through trial and error. We learned to use island radar shadows to mask our approach. We discovered that shutting down 2 engines and running on one drastically reduced our noise signature. And most importantly, we figured out how to coordinate multi-boat attacks using simple light signals the Japanese couldn't intercept. Our intelligence network was remarkable. Australian coast watchers hiding deep in Japanese-occupied islands would radio ship movements. Native Solomon Islanders, risking execution if caught, paddled out in canoes to warn us of enemy positions. Sometimes we received decrypted intelligence from Pearl Harbor with exact convoy schedules, but most of the time, we hunted using instinct and experience. PT boats were still classified as secret weapons in July 1943. Official Navy communications never mentioned us by name, only as small craft or mosquito boats. The Japanese knew something was hitting their convoys, but their early reports described us as submarines or mines. They simply couldn't believe the Americans were sending wooden speedboats against steel warships. That ignorance was our greatest advantage. On the night of July 18th, Coast Watcher reports signaled that a major Japanese reinforcement convoy would run through Blackett Strait, heading for VR on Kolombangara. This was the moment we had been waiting for. Multiple transports with minimal escort, forced to pass through waters so narrow that their superior numbers wouldn't matter. Mac volunteered our boat to lead the attack, along with PT-168 under Lieutenant Henry Hank Bramwell and PT-171 commanded by Lieutenant Junior Grade Joseph Joey Antonelli. The briefing that evening was tense. Intelligence estimated 3 large transports escorted by 1 or 2 destroyers, carrying elements of the Japanese 13th Regiment, elite troops who had fought in China and the Philippines. These weren't construction units or supply details. These were frontline killers who would make life hell for our Marines on New Georgia. Commander William Bill Specht, our squadron leader, didn't mince words. "Gentlemen, this convoy cannot reach VR. I don't care if you have to ram those transports. They go to the bottom tonight." As the sun set on July 19th, painting the Solomon sky blood red, we made our final preparations. Paddy O'Brien ran through his torpedo checklist for the 5th time, setting the Mark 13s to a depth of 10 feet and a speed of 28 knots, optimal for hitting a loaded transport. Charlie Mendoza tuned our engines to perfection and installed the mufflers to cut noise. Dutch Vanderberg plotted and replotted our attack approach, calculating currents, wind, and the moon's angle. I checked my machine guns one last time, making sure the belts would feed smoothly. We loaded only armor-piercing and incendiary rounds. Ball ammo was worthless against steel ships, but API rounds could punch through bridge windows, start fires, and keep enemy gunners' heads down. Every 5th round was a tracer, creating streaks of light that looked like deadly fireworks across the night sky. At 20-30 hours, we slipped our moorings and headed into the gathering darkness. The 3 boats moved in column, engines muffled to a low rumble. As we cleared Relive Harbor, Mac ordered weapons testing. The night erupted briefly as 12 machine guns and 3 20mm cannons barked into the empty sea, then silence again, broken only by the pulse of our engines and the hiss of water along the hull. The ocean was rougher than we'd hoped, a 2-foot chop that would hurt torpedo accuracy. But it also made our wakes harder to spot, and the wave noise would help hide our approach. Every advantage mattered when you were 80 feet of plywood attacking 400 feet of steel. By 2300 hours, we reached our ambush point off the north coast of Vella Lavella. Mac cut the engines to idle, and we drifted in darkness. Nothing but water lapping against the hull and the distant rumble of artillery from New Georgia. At 2,347 hours, Sparks Patterson picked up a Coast Watcher transmission. 3 large ships, 2 escorts, bearing 280, speed 18 knots, range 15 miles from your position. The hunt was on. Mac started 2 engines, keeping throttle low as we moved to intercept. The math was simple but unforgiving. The convoy was moving at 18 knots on a steady course. We could make 35 knots without creating too much wake. If we positioned ourselves correctly, We could intercept them at the narrowest point of Blackett Strait, where they'd have no room to maneuver. At 0018 hours on July 20th, Dutch spotted them through his binoculars, dark silhouettes against the stars, exactly where they should be. The Japanese held perfect formation, 2 destroyers in the lead, 3 transports behind, another destroyer trailing. No lights, of course, but once you knew what to look for, their massive shapes were unmistakable. Mac's plan was brutally simple and unbelievably dangerous. PT-168 would attack from port, PT-171 from starboard, while we went straight up the middle toward the lead transport. It meant passing between escorting destroyers, literally threading the needle through a tunnel of death, but if it worked, we'd create total confusion and get clean shots at all 3 transports. "All ahead slow," Mac whispered. We crept forward at 5 knots, letting the convoy come to us. At 2,000 yards, we could hear their engines, deep, throbbing diesels pushing thousands of tons through the water. At 1,500 yards, we could make out details: the pagoda-style bridge of the lead destroyer, the cargo booms on the transports, even silhouettes of men on deck. At 1,000 yards, Mac gave the signal. 3 clicks on the radio, and all 3 PT boats lunged forward. Our engines roared from idle to full throttle, the bow lifting as we accelerated to attack speed. The night shattered as we raced toward the convoy at 40 knots, 3 tiny wooden wolves charging a pack of steel giants. The Japanese were completely unprepared. Their lookouts were trained to spot submarines or destroyers, not attackers moving this fast from this close. We were inside their formation before they could react. I opened fire with my twin .50s, raking the bridge of the nearest destroyer, watching my tracers punch through windows and ricochet off steel. Fire 1. Fire 2. Paddy launched our first 2 Mark 13 torpedoes at just 600 yards, suicidally close range, where missing was almost impossible. The mechanical fish burst from their tubes, hit the water hard, and raced forward with props already screaming. Twin wakes of glowing phosphorescence stretched toward our target, a converted passenger liner carrying more than 3,000 Japanese troops. Then the destroyer on our starboard side finally reacted. Its searchlight snapped on and pinned us instantly, blinding white and deadly. Seconds later, their 25mm guns opened up. Green tracers clawed across the night sky toward us, splashes erupting so close the spray soaked everyone on deck. Then our torpedoes hit. The first slammed into the transport just aft of the bridge, an explosion bright enough to turn night into day. The second struck midships and snapped the ships back instantly. The 8,000-ton vessel heaved out of the water, cracked in half, and both sections immediately began to sink. Through the glare and gunfire, we could see hundreds of Japanese soldiers spilling into the sea, their screams cutting through even the roar of our engines. PT-168 hit next, both of her Mark 13s smashing into a second transport. This one was packed with ammunition and fuel for the VR garrison, and it went up like a volcano. The blast knocked me flat, a wave of superheated air sweeping across our deck as flaming debris rained down, igniting small fires we stomped out with our boots. Now the Japanese destroyers committed fully, but they faced a nightmare. We were too close for their main batteries to depress low enough to hit us, and we were tangled among their own transports. So they chose the only tactic left, ramming us. The nearest destroyer swung hard toward us, its knife-edged bow cutting straight for our beam. At our combined closing speed, we had maybe 10 seconds. Max slammed the wheel right and shoved the throttles past their stops. Our engines howled, the boat pivoted like a dancer, and we missed the destroyer's bow by less than 10 feet. As we flew past, I dumped an entire belt of ammo into their bridge at point-blank range, sparks leaping as the rounds hit home. PT-171 wasn't so lucky. Joey Antonelli had lined up a perfect shot on a third transport, but a destroyer's searchlights found him first. The enemy's 25mm guns stitched holes across PT-171's bow. One round hit a torpedo. Miraculously, it didn't detonate. The warhead still needed to arm in the water. Joey had no choice but to break off, trailing smoke and taking on water. We looped around for another attack run, but the element of surprise was gone. Every searchlight in the Japanese convoy swept the waves, and guns of every caliber fired wildly in all directions. The water looked like a rainstorm made of explosions. Worse, the Japanese finally brought their 5-inch guns to bear. One hit from those and we were vapor. "Launch the remaining fish and get us out of here," Max shouted over the chaos. Paddy fired our last 2 Mark 13s at the remaining transport, but its captain saw the wakes and turned parallel, both torpedoes sliding harmlessly past. With nothing left to fire, we ran for it, 3 engines at full power, zigzagging through geysers of shell splashes. Behind us, the battle raged on. PT-168, despite taking multiple hits, got 1 more torpedo into the already dying second transport. The ammunition ship's death throes lit up the entire strait, secondary explosions marching down her hull until she finally disappeared beneath the waves. 2 transports gone. Nearly 6,000 Japanese soldiers lost. The third transport and the destroyers survived, but they were shaken to their core. Instead of continuing toward VR, the surviving transport turned around and fled back to Rabaul. We regrouped 5 miles south of the engagement zone, 3 battered boats, all still afloat. PT-171 was in the worst condition, holes at the waterline and 1 engine dead. We came alongside, transferring wounded while our carpenters made stuffed mattresses and life jackets into the gaps to slow the flooding. PT-168 had lost her radio antenna and taken shrapnel throughout her superstructure, but she could still fight. Our boat somehow avoided major damage, just shrapnel holes, a scorched gun barrel, and burn marks. But we were alive, and we had done our job. 2 transports confirmed sunk. Thousands of enemy troops killed. Japanese reinforcement schedules thrown into chaos. The surviving transport turned back. The Japanese plans for VR were now in ruins. The trip home was brutal. At first light, Japanese float planes were hunting us. We hid in the shadows of tiny islands, camouflaging our boats with palm fronds, engines off, barely breathing as enemy aircraft droned overhead. What should have been a 3-hour return turned into 14 hours of dodging death, but every one of us made it back to Rendova. The debrief was exhaustive. Intelligence officers wanted everything: Japanese tactics, weapon performance, reaction times. What we told them would be shared with every PT squadron in the Pacific. Lessons written in tracer fire and saltwater, lessons that would save American lives and sink Japanese ships for the rest of the war. But the immediate impact was even greater. Radio intercepts revealed frantic Japanese communications about new American secret weapons, high-speed torpedo boats that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Suddenly, Japan could no longer move freely at night. Even their heaviest convoys weren't safe. Every shadow might hide a PT boat. Every distant hum might be American engines coming for them. In the weeks that followed, Japanese strategy changed almost overnight. Convoys became larger but less frequent. Destroyer escorts doubled, then tripled. Searchlight-equipped float planes began patrolling the night skies. But these adjustments came at a price. Fewer supplies and fewer reinforcements reached their island garrisons, giving our ground forces the edge they desperately needed. The psychological impact was even greater. Japanese troops waiting for reinforcements that never arrived began to lose hope. Enemy commanders, unable to guarantee deliveries, were forced to cancel offensive operations. The myth of Japanese nighttime invincibility, shattered by wooden boats crewed by American teenagers and reservists, began to crumble across the Pacific. Our squadron's success triggered a rapid expansion of the PT boat program. New bases sprang up across the Solomons and New Guinea. Improved boats with better engines, radar, and armor rushed into production. Tactics we'd learned through trial and error became official doctrine taught everywhere, from Rhode Island to California. But the cost of that success was measured in friends who never came home. 2 weeks after our attack, PT-166 struck a mine on its way back from patrol. All hands were lost. PT-162 was caught in daylight by Japanese destroyers when engine failure left her dead in the water. She was blown apart. Only 3 men survived. Joey Antonelli, skipper of PT-171, was killed by a sniper while refueling at a forward base. By October 1943, when I rotated back to the States for new construction training, our squadron had lost 7 boats and 73 men. But we'd sunk or damaged more than 40 Japanese vessels, from destroyers to supply barges, and killed thousands of enemy soldiers who never reached their destinations. The exchange rate was brutal, but necessary. PT boats could be replaced. Japanese ships and experienced crews could not. I returned to the Pacific in March 1944 as executive officer of PT-321 operating in the Philippines. The boats were better now: radar, armored cockpits, more reliable torpedoes. But the essence of PT warfare remained the same: speed, surprise, and audacity. We were still proving that American ingenuity could overcome any enemy advantage. And the Japanese never fully adapted. They tried everything: specialized hunter-killer squads, radar-equipped destroyers, even suicide boats designed to ram us. But they couldn't be everywhere. They couldn't protect every convoy. And they could never make the night safe again. The secret weapon they discovered too late had permanently shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. M. McPherson survived the war, earning a Navy Cross and 2 Silver Stars. He stayed in the Navy and eventually commanded a destroyer squadron in Korea. We remained close until his death in 1987. At his funeral, his son told me Mac often said PT boats were where he learned what real courage was, not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Dutch Vandenberg returned to Yale but never forgot his navigation lessons from the Solomons. He became one of America's leading oceanographers, using skills honed dodging Japanese destroyers to map currents and underwater mountains. He once said that after threading between enemy warships at 40 knots in total darkness, everything else in life felt easy. Charlie Mendoza went home to Los Angeles to build racing engines, applying tricks learned from keeping PT boat engines alive under fire. His garage became legendary among hot rodders. A sign over the door read, "Speed Shop. We made PT boats fly." Charlie loved telling customers that if he could make 4,500 horsepower push 50 tons at 45 knots, he could make anything go fast. Patty O'Brien stayed in the Navy, becoming one of its leading torpedo experts. He wrote the Mark 13 maintenance manual used until the 1970s. But he never forgot the torpedoes we fired that night off Vella Lavella. "Those were my fish that sank those transports," he'd say proudly. 2 shots, 2 hits, 6,000 Japanese who never made it to kill Americans. The PT boat story is often overshadowed by the famous battles: Midway, Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf. But for those of us who served on these tiny wooden warriors, we knew we'd been part of something revolutionary. We had proven that technology and courage could outweigh tradition and size. We showed that American sailors, many of whom had never seen the ocean before Pearl Harbor, could outfight Japan's best at their own game. The real secret of our success wasn't the boats, though they were engineering marvels. It wasn't even the torpedoes, devastating when they worked. The real secret was the American spirit of innovation, the willingness to try something radically different when traditional methods failed. Our admirals once dismissed PT boats as toys, but junior officers and enlisted men proved that toys with teeth could change the course of a war. Every time I read about modern naval warfare, missile boats, stealth ships, asymmetric tactics, I see the legacy of those PT boats. We proved that naval combat didn't have to be battleships slugging it out at 20,000 yards. It could be about speed and stealth, striking where the enemy least expected, and vanishing before they could strike back. Every modern fast attack craft carries the DNA of the tiny plywood PT boats that terrorized the Japanese Navy in 1943. The Japanese called it simply mosquito boat terror, a fear that spread through their fleet. Post-war interviews revealed the truth. PT boats caused disruption far beyond their actual numbers. Japanese commanders had to assume we were everywhere. They had to plan for attacks that might never come. They had to waste resources defending against threats that might be shadows. Admiral Tanaka Rizzo, who commanded many of the Tokyo Express runs, later wrote, "The American PT boats were our worst nightmare. Submarines we could hunt with depth charges. Aircraft we could see coming. But these devil boats appeared from nowhere, struck like cobras, and vanished into the night. They made us afraid of our own element, the darkness we had once ruled. That fear, that uncertainty we created, was worth more than any number of ships sunk. It marked the turning point when the Imperial Japanese Navy, dominant since Pearl Harbor, began to doubt itself. When sailors trained their entire lives for night combat started fearing shadows, the psychological battle was already won. The technical evolution of PT boats during the war was equally remarkable. Early boats, like ours, were essentially peacetime designs pressed into combat. By 1945, PT boats carried radar, rockets, advanced torpedoes, and even primitive guided missiles. Yet the core concept never changed: small, fast, deadly, and crewed by volunteers willing to take insane risks for their country. One story captures the PT boat spirit perfectly. In October 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, a squadron of PT boats, hopelessly outgunned, attacked the Japanese battleship Yamato, the largest warship ever built. Their torpedoes couldn't penetrate her armor, but they attacked anyway, forcing the massive battleship to maneuver and buying crucial time for American escort carriers to escape. They didn't sink the giant, but their courage saved American lives. The PT boat bases themselves became legendary: Relive, Tulagi, Myos, Wuendi, names that meant mosquitoes, malaria, and midnight missions. These weren't Pearl Harbor or San Diego with officers' clubs and clean sheets. These were muddy hellholes where we lived on Spam and cigarettes, where mail took months to arrive, and the only entertainment was poker and rumors. Yet morale remained high because we knew we were making a difference. The native Solomon Islanders deserve special recognition. They risked everything to guide us through reefs, rescue downed airmen and shipwrecked sailors, and provide intelligence on Japanese movements. Many were executed if caught helping Americans. Without their courage and sacrifice, we would have been blind and lost in those deadly island mazes. Coast watchers, lonely volunteers hiding on Japanese-occupied islands with radios and binoculars, were our guardian angels. They'd warn of approaching bombers or destroyer squadrons. Their reports often saved our bases from surprise attacks or helped us position for perfect ambushes. We never met most of them, yet we owed them our lives. Radar was another game changer. Early sets were primitive, barely distinguishing islands from ships. By late 1944, however, we could track targets in total darkness and fog. Suddenly, the Japanese, reliant on superior night vision and training, were at a disadvantage. We could see them before they could see us, gaining the ultimate edge in night combat. Tactics evolved constantly. We used aluminum foil strips to confuse Japanese radar. We developed wolfpack tactics, coordinating attacks from multiple directions. We even used shore batteries as diversions, baiting enemy fire while maneuvering for the real strike. Some missions were deadly but invisible, inserting coast watchers behind enemy lines, evacuating surrounded Marines, running ammunition to isolated outposts under fire. Not glamorous, but vital work that saved countless lives. PT boats became the Navy's Swiss Army knife, used for anything too dangerous or crazy for conventional vessels. Life aboard a PT boat was intimate. On a destroyer with 300 men, you might not know everyone's name. On a 12-man PT boat, you knew everything: who snored, who had nightmares, who got seasick, and who could be counted on when chaos struck. Those bonds lasted a lifetime. Decades later, PT boat reunions felt like family gatherings, because that's what we were, a family forged in combat. The food deserves mention, if not complaint. We lived on K-rations, Spam, powdered eggs, and whatever we could trade. Fresh water was rationed. We washed in seawater, leaving salt crystals that chafed and burned. Coffee, black and strong enough to float a wrench, was our lifeblood. Some crews improvised, fishing with hand grenades or trading torpedo alcohol for real food. Maintenance was constant. Saltwater corroded everything, tropical heat rotted wood and fabric, and high-speed runs stressed every component. Every man became a mechanic, carpenter, and electrician. A PT boat with engine failure in enemy waters was a death trap, so maintenance was treated like religion. The weather in the Solomons was another enemy. Tropical squalls could appear suddenly, turning calm seas into mountains. Lightning could fry radios and electrical systems. Heat and humidity could make men pass out at their posts. But bad weather was also an ally, hiding us from enemy aircraft and making our small boats harder to detect. Navigation required skills not taught at Annapolis. Charts were outdated. Coral reefs could appear overnight. We learned to read watercolor and wave patterns, to smell land before seeing it, to navigate by instinct when instruments failed. Every successful patrol added to our mental maps of those deadly waters. The Japanese, meanwhile, adapted in response to PT boats. They built shallow draft destroyers to hunt us, coordinated search patterns with float planes and destroyers, and even experimented with captured vessels. But no adaptation could eliminate the fear PT boats inspired, or erase the legacy of audacity, speed, and surprise. PT boats as decoys. But for every countermeasure the Japanese developed, we developed a countermeasure. It became a deadly game of chess, played at 40 knots in the dark. One aspect rarely discussed is the psychological toll. Living constantly on edge, knowing any patrol could be your last, watching friends die in horrific ways, it left its mark. Some men cracked, requesting transfers, even if it meant being labeled cowards. Others became addicted to adrenaline, volunteering for increasingly dangerous missions. Most of us just endured, finding ways to cope with a fear that never truly left. Dark humor became a survival tool. We named our boats Sudden Death, Hell's Angels, and Grim Reaper. Cartoon characters adorned our torpedoes. Donald Duck riding a torpedo was a favorite. We made up gruesome songs about sinking Japanese ships. It was psychological armor, a way to make the unbearable bearable. The influence of PT boats extended far beyond the Pacific. When planning the Normandy invasion, PT boats were deployed to protect Allied fleets from German E-boats. Lessons learned in the Solomons were applied across the Mediterranean, the English Channel, and even Europe's rivers. American PT boat doctrine influenced navies worldwide, inspiring similar programs across dozens of countries. Looking back decades later, it's astonishing we survived. We were mostly kids playing with deadly toys in a war that killed millions. We made mistakes that should have killed us, took risks that make me shudder in retrospect. But we also accomplished something remarkable, turning an untested concept into a war-winning weapon. We proved that American innovation and courage could overcome any obstacle. The legacy of PT boats lives on in today's Navy. Every fast attack craft, every special operations boat, every vessel designed to strike quickly and vanish carries the DNA of those mosquito boats. The sailors crewing them might not know about nights off Vella Lavella or the terror we brought to Japanese convoys, but there are spiritual descendants carrying on the tradition of speed, surprise, and audacity. When people ask if I'm proud of my service, I tell them about that night of July 20th, 1943. 3 small wooden boats attacked a major enemy convoy, sending thousands of Japanese soldiers to the bottom. We emerged from darkness, and just as our name suggests, we disappeared before the enemy could respond. We were America's secret weapon, and we changed the course of the Pacific War. The Japanese were stunned not just by our boats, but by what they represented: American willingness to innovate, to take risks, to challenge conventional wisdom. They had studied our Navy for decades, knew our battleships and carriers, our tactics and traditions, but they never imagined sending wooden speedboats armed with torpedoes to challenge steel warships. That failure of imagination cost them dearly. The story of PT boats is uniquely American. We took a British concept, powered it with aircraft engines, armed it with torpedoes meant for destroyers, and crewed it with civilians who had never seen the ocean before Pearl Harbor. It shouldn't have worked, but we made it work through sheer determination and ingenuity. The last operational PT boat was retired in 1959, replaced by faster, more capable vessels. But for those of us who served in World War II, there'll always be the boats that won the Pacific. We proved that size doesn't determine victory, that courage matters more than armor, and that American sailors in wooden boats could defeat anyone, anywhere, anytime. As I sit in my study, surrounded by faded photographs and yellowed clippings, I can still hear those Packard engines roaring through the night. I can still feel the spray of Solomon seawater on my face, smell the cordite and diesel fumes. Most of all, I can still feel the pride of being part of something revolutionary, something that changed naval warfare forever. We were boys who became men in those wooden boats, fighting a war we didn't start but were determined to finish. We attacked from darkness because that was where we were strongest, where our speed and surprise gave us the advantage. The Japanese learned to fear the darkness they once owned. They learned that American ingenuity could turn any disadvantage into an advantage. That's the legacy of PT boats. Not just the ships we sank or the battles we won, but the proof that free people fighting for freedom can overcome any tyranny. We were small, fast, deadly, secret weapons that stayed secret just long enough to turn the tide. We were the mosquito fleet that brought down an empire, one torpedo at a time. The Japanese were stunned by America's secret PT boats because they represented everything the Imperial Navy hadn't expected. Innovative thinking, aggressive tactics, and a willingness to risk everything on an unproven concept. By the time they understood the threat, it was too late. The shadows they once ruled now belonged to us. From those shadows, we struck without mercy, until the rising sun finally set on Japan's Pacific Empire.